Hello, day seven of 30 days reading challenge. Book Plato, The Republic, Book 10, Part 2, Part 2 or Part 3. That's absolutely true. Then let that's absolutely true. Then let this be our defense. Now that we have returned to the topic of poetry, that in view of its nature, we had reason to banish it from the city earlier. For our argument compelled us to do so. But in case we are charged with a certain hardness and lack of sophistication, let's also try poetry that there is an ancient quarrel between it and philosophy, which is evidenced by such expression as the dog yelping at shrinking at its master. Great in the empty eloquence, ability to speak or write, great in the empty of eloquence of fools, the mob of wise men that has mastered Jews, and the subtle thinker beggars of. Nonetheless, if the poetry that aims at pleasure and imitations has any arguments to bring forward that proves it ought to have a place in a well-governed city, we at least would be glad to admit it, for we are well aware of the charm it exercises. But be that as it may, to betray what one believes to be the truth in impious. What about you, Milacon? Don't you feel the charm of pleasure giving muse, especially when you study her through the eyes of Homer? Very much so. Therefore, isn't it just that such poetry should return from exile when it has successfully defended itself, whether in lyric or any other medium, certainly? Then we will allow its defenders, who are not poets themselves but lovers of poetry, to speak in prose on its behalf, and to show that it not only gives pleasure but is beneficial both the constitutions and to human life. Indeed, we will listen to them graciously, for we would certainly profit if poetry was shown to be not only pleasant but also beneficial. How could we fail to profit? However, if such a defense is not made, we will behave like people who have fallen in love with someone who forces them to stay away from him because they realize that their passion isn't beneficial. In the same way, because the love of this sort of poetry has been implanted in us by the upbringing we have received under our fine constitutions, we are well disposed to any proof that it is the best and truest thing. But if it isn't able to produce such a defense, then whenever we listen to it, we will repeat the argument we have just now put forward like an incantation, so as to preserve ourselves from slipping back into that childish passion of poetry which the majority of people have. And we will go on chanting that such poetry is not to be taken seriously, or treated as a serious undertaking with some kind of hold on the truth, but that anyone who is anxious about the constitutions within him must be careful when he hears it, and must continue to believe what he has said about it. I completely agree. Yes, for the struggle to be good rather than bad is important. glucose much more important than people think. Therefore, we must not be tempted by honor, money, rule, and even poetry into neglecting justice and the rest of virtue. After what we have said, I agree with you, and so I think would anyone else. And yet, we haven't discussed the greatest rewards and prizes that have been proposed for virtue. They most inconceivably great, if they are greater than those you have already mentioned. Could anything really great come to pass in a short time? And isn't the time from childhood to old age short when compared to the whole of time? It's a mere nothing. Well, do you think that an immortal thing should be seriously concerned with that sort period rather than with the whole of time? I suppose not. But what exactly do you mean by this? Haven't you realized that our soul is immortal and never destroyed? He looked at me with wonder and said, "No, by God, I haven't. Are you really in a position to assert that?" "I would be wrong not to," I said, "and so would you, for it isn't difficult. It is for me, and so I would be glad to hear from you what's not difficult about it. Listen then, just speak and I will. Do you talk about good and bad? I do. And do you think about them the way I do? What way is that? The bad is entirely coterminous. Coterminous. The bad is entirely coterminous with what destroys and corrupts, and the good is what preserves and benefits. I do. And do you say that there is a good and bad for everything? For example, ophthalmia for eyes, sickness for the whole body, blight for grain, root rot for wood, rust for iron or bronze. In other words, is there, as I say, a natural badness and sickness for pretty well everything there is? And when one of these attaches itself to something, doesn't it make the things in question bad? And in the end, doesn't it disintegrate it and destroy it wholly? Of course. Therefore, the evil that is natural to each thing and the bad that is peculiar to it destroy it. However, if we don't destroy it, nothing else will, or for the good would never destroy anything, nor would anything neither good or bad. How could it? Then, if we discover something that has an evil that but it makes it bad, but isn't able to distin- disintegrate and destroy it, can't we infer that it is naturally incapable of being destroyed? Probably so. Well, what about the soul? Isn't there something that makes it bad? Certainly. All the things we are mentioning: injustice, licentious, licentiousness, cowardice, and lack of learning. Does any of these disintegrate and destroy the soul? Keep your wits about you, and let's not too deceived into thinking that when an unjust and foolish person is caught, he has been destroyed by injustice, which is evil in a soul. Let's think about it this way instead. Just as the body is worn out, destroyed, and brought to the point where it is a body no longer by disease, which is evil in the body. So all the things we mentioned just now reach the point at which they cease to be what they are through their own peculiar evil, which attaches itself to them. Isn't that so? Yes. They look at the soul in some way, same way. Do injustice and other vices that exist in soul by their very presence in it, and by attaching themselves to it, corrupt it, and make it waste away until, having brought it to the point of death, they separate it from the body. That's not at all what they do. But surely it's reasonable to suppose that a thing is destroyed by the badness proper to something else when it is not destroyed by its own. That is unreasonable. Keep in mind, Gurukam, that we don't think that a body is destroyed. Keep in mind, Gurukam, that we don't think that a body is destroyed by the badness of food, whether it is staleness, rottenness, or anything else. But if the badness of the food happens to implant in the body an evil proper to a body, we will say that a body was destroyed by its own evil, namely disease. But since the body is one thing and food is another, we will never judge that a body is destroyed by the badness of it, unless it implants in it the body's own natural and peculiar evil. That is absolutely right. By the same argument, if the body's evil does not cause an evil in the soul that appeal to the soul, we will never judge that a soul, in the absence of its own peculiar evil, is destroyed by the evil of something else. We would never accept that anything is destroyed by an evil proper to something else. That's so reasonable. Then let's either refute our argument and show that we were wrong, or as long as it remains unrefuted. Let's never say that soul is destroyed by a fever, or any other disease, or by killing either, for that matter. Not even if the body is cut up into tiny pieces. We must not say that the soul is even close to being destroyed. But these things, until someone shows us that these conditions of the body make the soul more unjust, more impious. When something has the evil proper to something else in it, but its own peculiar evil is absent, we won't allow anyone to say that it is destroyed, no matter whether it is a soul or anything else whatever. And you may be sure that no one will ever prove that the souls of the dying are made more unjust by death. But if anyone dares to come to grips with our argument in order to avoid having to agree that our souls are immortal, then says that a dying man does become more vicious But if anyone dares to come to grasp with our argument in order to avoid having to agree with ourselves are immortal, and says that a dying man does become more vicious and unjust, we will reply that if what he says is true, then injustice must be as deadly to unjust people as a disease, and those who catch it must die of it because of its own deadliness, with the worst dying quickly and the less serious dying more slowly. As things now stand, however, it isn't like that at all. Unjust people also indeed die of injustice, but at the hands of others who inflicted death penalties on them. By God, if injustice were actually fatal to those who contracted it, it wouldn't seem so terrible, for it would be an escape from their troubles. But I rather think that it's clearly the opposite, something that is other people if it can, while on top of making the unjust themselves lovely. It even brings them out at night, hence it's very far from being deadly to its possessor.